Eva Kor is a Holocaust survivor who brought her personal story to Montana and brought many Montanans back to Auschwitz, where she led personal tours of the concentration camp that was home to her torturer, the Nazi Dr. Mengele. Eva was one of the Mengele twins. Well, today on the show, we've got two great folks joining us here in studio. Longtime friend and Montana sportscaster Rocky Erickson, along with Billings West High teacher Rob Stanton. They're joining us as we're going to remember the life and legacy of Eva Kor, who passed away just last week. Rob Stanton, of course, teaches a genocide class at West High and has brought several groups of students back to Auschwitz with Eva Kor. Rocky, first off, great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us here in studio.
Thank you, Aaron Flint. Thank you for all you do for Montana.
Well, what was it when you got the word that Eva Kor had passed away? I guess what first went through your mind?
I got a text from her son, Alex, and he said, it's really important that you call me right away. And my heart just sank even before I talked to him. I was pretty sure what it was, and I was a little surprised. I mean, I visited with Rob Stanton the day before, and Rob just got back from Krakow, Poland, and Auschwitz, and he said Eva was doing fine, and it was a little bit surprising.
I had actually a cousin, well, second or third cousin, cousin who was going, and she just graduated from Billings West High and took Rob Stanton's genocide class, and so I was at her graduation party, and she says, well, I'm getting ready to go to Poland. I said, well, what are you going there for? She said she was going on this trip with Eva Kor. I said, wow, that's remarkable. I said, what an incredible opportunity, because you just, there's only a short window of time where people are going to have the opportunity to get a chance to not only visit places like Auschwitz, but with a Holocaust survivor and somebody like Eva Kor, one of the Mengele twins. And she literally was on, the week before Eva passed away, she was on one of the last trips there.
I'm going to let Rob talk about that, but Rob was the one that convinced me to go back with him and the West High group. And the most incredible experience for me was a life-changing experience, because I've taken Eva's story to schools and shared in churches her forgiveness message. But in cell block 6, where they have the Twins Museum, part of Auschwitz, there's a photo. It's about 5 or 6 feet tall, and it's Eva and her twin sister Miriam being escorted out by the Russian troops. And Eva stands underneath that photo, and she points to the little girl herself, 10 years old, and then she points to herself. And I've seen tour guides that have, broken down and cried, and that, to me, was one of the most powerful experiences I had.
Remarkable.
At Auschwitz.
And we got the news late last week that Eva Kor had passed away peacefully at the age of 85. Fox News reports that Eva died peacefully at the age of 85. A longtime resident of Terre Haute, Indiana, Kor preached forgiveness even to the Nazis who tortured her and her sister. She spent the past 40 years sharing her story with students, teachers, doctors, senators, historians, and civic groups both nationally and internationally. I liked this piece from the New York Times. They also had her obituary over the weekend. Known as the woman in blue for the outfit she favored, she had boundless energy. People would see pictures of her and think, here's a 4'9" sweet little old lady. And Keel Majewski, the first executive director of the Candles Museum, told WBAA Radio in West Lafayette, Indiana, he says, I would want to quickly disabuse them of those notions. She was a non-stop bulldozer, 4'9", and yes, she was. If you got to meet her here in Montana, you would definitely say that was so. Well, Rocky Erickson put together a special tribute for Eva Kor. In fact, I understand it's going to air nationally tonight, I think, on Jim Bohannon's show. Here's Rocky Erickson's special tribute.
This is Rocky Erickson with a special edition program. July 4th, 2019 was not a day of celebration for me. No, it was the day the world lost an amazing young lady. Up next, my tribute to Eva Moses Kor. Where do I start? I could tell you how incredible it was to visit Auschwitz with Holocaust survivor Eva Kor, to stand in the Twins building and watch her point to the photo of her and her twin sister Miriam, and then to herself. I witnessed more than once a tour guide break down and cry. Twice we were able to host Eva in our home. Her incredible story of forgiveness, told around our dining room table, gave me chills. Or how about traveling to Indianapolis with Rob Stanton to attend the world premiere of her documentary? The next day, we got to ride with her and her son Alex to visit her Candles Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. Following that visit, I texted Eva a photo of her and I said that when I grow up, I want to be a tour guide at Candles. 84-year-old Eva Kor texted me back and said that when she grows up, she wanted to be the voice of basketball in Montana. I could also tell you about the countless times that I shared her survival story at schools. But the one event that I witnessed at Auschwitz that I could not tell for a long time without tearing up was when Eva stood at the selection platform and read that forgiveness letter to her father, forgiving him for the beatings, but thanking him that it made her strong enough to survive the death camp. But the one event that means the most to me is what took place on March 24th of 2015. Eva Kor speaking at Billings West. At the time, the crowd of almost 3,500 was the largest that she'd ever spoken to. That night, I was able to get two 10-year-old twins to escort Eva to the stage, the same age that Eva and her twin sister Miriam were when they were at Auschwitz. You know, I find it interesting that Eva passed away yesterday in Krakow, Poland, near that dreaded Auschwitz death camp. Eva Moses Kor may have only been 4 feet 9 inches tall, but when it came to survival and forgiveness, she was a giant. Eva, the world will never be the same without you. This is Rocky Erickson.
All right, great tribute there by Rocky Erickson. I think it's interesting, too. She died on the 4th of July, but outside the gates of Auschwitz, and she died a free woman. We're remembering the life and legacy of Holocaust survivor Eva Kor. She survived the torture of the Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele, and not only did she survive that and live to tell about it, but remarkably, she shares this just incredible story of forgiveness, even for the Nazis who tortured her. And she's made so many trips back here to Montana that she's really, there's a lot of folks who frankly would have never gotten this opportunity to hear this type of a story if it wasn't for Eva Kor coming here to Montana. Joining us in studio, Rocky Erickson and Billings West High teacher and coach Rob Stanton. Coach Stanton, thanks to you for joining us here in studio as well.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, you've been doing these trips with Eva for probably 9 years or so, and you were just on the trip about a week and a half ago, the week before she died.
Yeah, this was, I believe it was my 8th trip, and I always take former West High students, so we've had over 40 plus West High kids that have been on this trip, so I think that's probably the most important part of Eva's passing for, in our perspective, where they can keep telling her story. But when we last left her, probably on the 1st of July, she was great. She was a little bit tired, I noticed one day, but otherwise I thought she was back on her A game. And talking to her son Alex the night before, I spent about 2 hours with him before we left on Sunday. And when I got the same call, the same text that Rocky got, I was pretty dang surprised of her passing, because she was looking like the good old Eva, the honorary Eva, the stubborn Eva, telling people how she felt and telling a phenomenal story that she's been doing for many years. I
was talking with 3 of your students earlier this morning, 3 students who were on that same trip with you. And I told them, I said, I've been reading polling. We've been seeing these news stories out here because there's a lot of references in modern day politics about Nazis and concentration camps. And without getting into the southern border security debate here, this term concentration camp and Nazis gets thrown out pretty easily these days and age. But what I asked them about, I said, we've been reading polling that says that young people, younger millennials, don't even know what the Holocaust is. I said, is this true? Are there a lot of young people your age, even here in Montana, that don't know what the Holocaust is? And they told me, they said, before we took Coach Stanton's genocide class, they said we knew other young people who didn't, before they took your class, they had not ever been taught or heard anything about the Holocaust before. That's crazy to me to think that there are young people growing up that that aren't hearing this history.
And especially in our area, I think our high school and I think the schools around the surrounding areas, they do a very good job of teaching the Holocaust and the lessons of the Holocaust, but that surprises me as well. And I agree with the polling. I've seen it as well, and it's shocking that the number of younger people that aren't engaged in this topic, genocide in general. I think it's frightening of what hopefully, or not hopefully, but what potentially could happen. So at least with our class, I wish I know those kids and I would identify them and pull them in, even if they weren't in class, just to hear a lecture or two or a lesson or two. But we have to do a better job, and I think that's one of Eva's goals, is to make sure that we are spreading her message and we're spreading her word. So, we have ambassadors like Rocky and you, Aaron, as well, and myself and the people that have been over on that trip to make sure that we continually talk about Eva's story and the Holocaust as well.
One of the things that I didn't even realize, actually, I think this was what I had kind of picked up when, Rocky in his special tribute there, Rocky, you talked about having Eva at your house for dinner with some folks in
You were
town.
there.
And I got such an incredible opportunity to be there with you and your great wife, Christy, as well. But I remember Eva talking about how basically before the 1980s, there was no talk of the Holocaust. Because I grew up in the 1980s as a kid, and I remember just being mortified by seeing, films that talked about the Holocaust. And so because I saw that as a little kid, I just assumed that everybody knew about the Holocaust and grew up knowing about the horrors of the Holocaust. And yeah, World War II veterans knew about it and everything else, but their story wasn't really widely told. And so Eva actually her family faced a lot of discrimination prior to that point, even in Indiana.
Well, a lot of it had to do with the movie Schindler's List. When that came out, it sort of highlighted, the Holocaust and those that survived. And I think it was shortly after that where Eva started telling her story. Is that correct?
Yeah. The first time that she started speaking was in 1978, the miniseries Holocaust. I know some members of Congress back in the day, they kind of like, this is in our face, because the survivors didn't talk about it for 20 years plus. I met a survivor from Rwanda in Chicago when I was last there. He's 34. He was 8 when he went through the Rwandan genocide. And he has a difficult time talking about it. The PTSD that he still has, he'll mention it and he'll talk about it sometimes on stage, but he'll break down and cry. So it just takes time for these wounds to heal. And I would agree with Rocky. When Schindler's List came out, then it exploded, and a lot of Holocaust survivors did start talking about it more.
That's interesting because, you think about, we all know people struggling with post-traumatic stress, whether it's, from, something awful that happened to them as a kid or veterans. I mean, Iraq veterans, World War II veterans who in their families will say, yeah, Grandpa never talks about it, or yeah, he won't talk about it. But then once they finally do open up and talk about it, they talk about how healing that can be to finally open up about some of these. So talk about your genocide class. I know some of our listeners have been familiar with it in the past, but because I almost mistakenly referred to it as a Holocaust class. It's not a Holocaust class. It is a genocide class. What do you try to instill in these kids with this class?
Well, looking at different perspectives. Sometimes we're so stuck in our ways, and I try to be just open their minds to different things that have happened around the world. Somebody like you have seen a lot of things around the world. Obviously, I don't have that expertise, but just give open a mind to different things. So it's not just the Holocaust, and we talk about Rwanda, we talk about Darfur, we talk about Cambodia, we talk about the Armenians. We'll also talk about all the different good and bad things that are happening around us. Something Native American. Sometimes we have some things, some prejudices. Not saying that's common, but it does happen where we have to expose those things as well. So it's a senior elective class. We'll have 3 classes per semester. So we have anywhere from 160 to 180 seniors that will graduate that will take the class. I wish it could be more, but they limit me to that many classes. But a lot of them do take the class, and we'll spend anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks on the Holocaust. And my job, I think, in order to understand history, you have to understand what's going on right now as well. So we open up to anything, and it's really student-led. We try to do as much discussion as possible, and I'll try to guide the course and their conversations as it goes on.
The fact is, I've talked with some of your students about this earlier too, that we can be a little sheltered. I mean, yeah, there's bad things that happen in our backyard as well here in Montana, especially with this meth epidemic. But by and large, we live in a very safe, very comfortable country, and we think of genocide as a topic of the past. We think of slavery as a topic of the past, but then we got human trafficking going on, even in our own backyard. But look at D-Rock, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and what's going on there right in this day and age, and the attacks on Christians in Nigeria by the Boko Haram extremists. Unfortunately, there are modern-day examples that you can point to.
Right, and we do. And, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about the bad things, because I don't want the kids leaving the class just all depressed, and I don't want to come back to that class. So we have to be careful, too, of how much we go into detail, but I don't sugarcoat it. But I also want to protect them and, kind of make sure that they're not scarred from taking a class where we could show. I don't show just clip after clip of corpses and things like that. That's not appropriate, and there's no need to show things like that. So the more open dialogue, kids want to be heard. And kids want, as you probably found out this morning, they want to express their opinions. They want to learn. And my job is to make sure that they can do that. And, it's an environment that is non-threatening, and, they can do as much talking as possible. And, if there's things that aren't factually correct, and we'll look them up and we'll discuss them, and we'll try to get to the point where, we don't have to agree with everybody. And I don't want a class of robots, and I want different personalities and different perspectives. And I think that's one of the major pluses of the class.
Are there other courses like yours being taught at other high schools across the state, or what have you heard is going on across the state?
John Tuke in Miles City has replicated the class that I have, and he does that now in Miles City. So I wish there were more. And that's one thing. I guess one of my last memories of Eva is when we sat down with her Saturday morning, or maybe it was Friday afternoon, and that's one of the things she was going to talk to with Michael Berenbaum, who's one of the lead Holocaust scholars around the country. And one of her questions to our group was, should we also include other genocides in the Holocaust with the class like that I have? And they said, absolutely. So she took that to Mr. Berenbaum. I think that was Monday, which would have been like July 1st or 2nd. I don't know how that discussion went, but that was one of the things that she wanted to do. She wanted to speak to Congress, and she wanted Michael to be able to do that for her, set that up. I don't know how you could just set up speaking to members of Congress, but she wanted to have classes like we have in Billings, not only talking about the Holocaust, but all the other genocides that have happened as well.
Yeah,
why don't we make it mandatory in every high school that they have to have some type of genocide class, or at least know about the Holocaust? Some states, they do have that.
Yep.
Why not every state? Why not Montana?
Yeah, well, I know one of the things that Superintendent of Public Instruction Elsie Arnson is talking about doing is, getting the Pledge of Allegiance back in the schools all across the state of Montana to continue instilling that sense of patriotism. So I know that's one effort she's talked about as she's announced her reelection into 2020. But yeah, but are there other things that not only just instilling patriotism, but reminding people what happens when we don't have these freedoms and we don't defend these freedoms and have the ability to defend these freedoms, of course, as well. Rocky, when you talk about Eva Kor, how do you describe her story? Because unfortunately, she's not around anymore to share her story. But more and more, the World War II veterans, the Holocaust survivors, they're not going to be around. But somebody needs to keep telling their stories.
Eva, she said what she wanted to say, and she was extremely bold. I'll never forget being in Glasgow when we brought her to Glasgow, and we were doing the talk show, and the first question I asked Eva was, Eva, tell us about you and your family getting on that train and going to Auschwitz. Now, we're live on the radio. And Eva just stops and she says, Rocky, you sportscaster guy, you don't know nothing. I was forced on that train. I did not get on that train. I was forced on that train.
Yeah, the bulldozer, as Keel Majewski described her there, that's for sure.